The auctioneer's hammer came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot. Sold to Harold Brewster for $12.8 million. Vincent Carradine's face went white as paper, his trembling hands clutching the edge of the mahogany table where 43 years ago they'd made me stand like a servant while everyone else sat. The same table where they'd laughed when I asked for my pension, where they'd called security when I wouldn't leave quietly. Now I owned it all. The building, the furniture, their precious corner offices with city views. Every brick, every window, every goddamn chair they'd denied me. Carradine's mouth moved, but no sound came out, and I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. The weight of my father's work boots finally walking on their necks instead of kissing their asses. My name is Harold Brewster, but everyone calls me Hal. I'm 62 years old, and 3 months ago I did something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Something my late wife Eleanor would have called either the smartest or stupidest thing I'd ever done. I'm still not sure which. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was fixing the kitchen faucet that had been dripping for 2 weeks. Elena used to handle the honey-do lists, but she'd been gone 8 months now, and I was learning that grief makes you forget about leaky faucets and burned coffee and all the small things that keep a house from falling apart. Mr. Brewster. The voice was crisp, professional, the kind that belonged to someone who'd never fixed their own plumbing. This is Dorothy Sullivan from Carradine Industries. Mr. Carradine would like to see you in his office this afternoon at 2 o'clock. I twisted the wrench harder than necessary. Carradine Industries. 43 years I'd worked for that company, starting in the loading dock when Vincent's father still ran things, back when a handshake meant something and they knew your name, without checking a computer screen. "What's this about?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone, sir. Will you be able to make it?" The wrench slipped, and my knuckles scraped against the cabinet. Blood welled up in 3 thin lines. "I'll be there." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the chrome faucet, distorted, stretched thin, older than I felt inside. In 4 hours, I'd find out if the rumors were true, if the restructuring Vincent had been whispering about for months was finally going to land on my desk like a guillotine blade. The drive to downtown took 35 minutes through traffic that seemed thicker than usual, or maybe time was just moving differently when you're heading toward your own execution. I parked in the visitors section, visitor after 4 decades, and walked through the glass doors of the building I'd helped construct with my sweat and overtime and missed dinners. The lobby had been renovated since my last visit 6 months ago. Everything was white marble and chrome now, cold as a morgue. The young receptionist looked through me like I was invisible, her manicured fingers clicking on a keyboard that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "Harold Brewster for Mr. Carradine," I said. She glanced up with the practiced smile of someone who'd perfected the art of polite dismissal. "Take the elevator to the 15th floor. Ms. Sullivan will meet you." "There?" The elevator was new too, silent, smooth. Nothing like the rattling cage we used to ride up to the warehouse offices. I watched the numbers climb and thought about the first time I'd been in this building. 22 years old, with dirt under my fingernails, and Elena's phone number written on my palm in blue ink. I'd been so nervous I'd sweated it off before lunch. Dorothy Sullivan was waiting when the doors opened, a woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair and the kind of posture that suggested she'd been holding up other people's bad decisions for years. She led me down a hallway lined with photographs of company milestones, past images of ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings, and handshakes with mayors and governors. I was in exactly 3 of those photos, always in the background, always in work clothes, always anonymous. "Mr. Carradine is running a few minutes late," she said, opening a door to a conference room. "Please have a seat and—" I stopped in the doorway. The conference room stretched out like a football field, dominated by a mahogany table that could have seated 30 people. But there were only 12 chairs around it, and every single one was occupied. Men in suits I recognized from the annual reports, women with clipboards and laptops, all of them turning to look at me with expressions ranging from mild curiosity to outright annoyance. Vincent Carradine sat at the head of the table in a chair that looked more like a throne. He was younger than me, by 15 years, but had gone grey at the temples in that distinguished way that rich men do. Even their aging was more elegant than ours. "Harold," he said, not getting up. Thank you for coming. I looked around the room again, counting chairs, counting faces, doing simple math that made my chest tight. Where am I supposed to sit? The question hung in the air like smoke. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Vincent's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. I'm sorry, we weren't expecting... Dorothy started, but Vincent held up a hand. It's fine. Harold, why don't you just stand right there? This won't take long. 43 fucking years, and they wanted me to stand in their boardroom like a scolded child while they sat in leather chairs that cost more than my car. I felt heat crawling up my neck, the same heat I'd felt the day Elena's doctor told us the insurance wouldn't cover her experimental treatment, the same heat I'd felt watching her fade away in a hospital bed while pharmaceutical executives bought third homes. But I stayed standing, because that's what men like me do. We stand when they tell us to stand. We smile when they want us to smile. We take what they give us and say thank you for the privilege. Harold, Vincent began, leaning back in his chair with the casual authority of someone who'd never wondered if he could afford his next mortgage payment. You've been with the company for a long time. 43 years next month. 43 years. That's remarkable loyalty. He said the word loyalty like it was quaint, something from a bygone era like rotary phones or handwritten letters, which is why this is particularly difficult. Here it comes, I thought, the knife wrapped in corporate speak and false sympathy. The company is restructuring, Vincent continued. We're streamlining operations, eliminating redundancies. Your position is being phased out effective. Immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the back of the nearest chair, someone else's chair, to keep from swaying. My pension? Vincent exchanged a glance with a woman in a black suit who looked like she ate terminated employees for breakfast. I'm afraid the pension fund has been absorbed into other operational requirements. However, we're prepared to offer you a severance package of 6 months' salary, contingent upon your signing a non-disclosure agreement. 6 months. Eleanor's medical bills had eaten through our savings like acid through metal. 6 months wouldn't cover the mortgage, let alone the credit card debt from her treatments, the second mortgage I'd taken out when the insurance ran dry. 43 years, I said again, my voice hoarse. I started working here when I was 19. I've never missed a day, never filed a complaint, never... And the company appreciates that, Vincent said smoothly. But this is business, Harold. I'm sure you understand. I looked around the room at their faces, bored, impatient, already thinking about their next meetings, their lunch reservations, their weekend plans. None of them had worked a day of manual labor in their lives. None of them had held their spouse's hand while machines kept her breathing. None of them knew what it felt like to have your life's work dismissed with a handshake and a legal document. I understand, I said finally. But as I stood there in their marble palace, surrounded by their expensive furniture and their indifferent stares, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Elena's funeral. Not sadness, not fear, something sharper, cleaner, something that tasted like metal and burned like whiskey. I understood exactly what kind of men they were, and for the first time in 43 years, I was going to do something about it. The elevator ride down felt like falling through water. 15 floors of silence, broken only by the mechanical hum and my own heartbeat, hammering against my ribs. When the doors opened, I walked straight past the receptionist without a word, through the lobby where my footsteps echoed off marble that had been installed with my tax dollars. The city tax breaks Caradine Industries had received for job creation and economic development. The parking garage was cooler, filled with shadows and the smell of exhaust. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The severance papers sat on the passenger seat like a cancer diagnosis, all legal terminology and corporate doublespeak that boiled down to one simple message. 43 years means nothing. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, my son. How did it go, Dad? I stared at the screen until it went dark, then started the engine. The drive home took me past Riverside Cemetery, where Eleanor had been buried 8 months ago under a headstone I was still paying for in installments. I almost went to tell her what had happened, But I couldn't face her grave with this kind of defeat in my chest. She'd always been the strong one, the one who believed in fairness and justice and the idea that hard work eventually paid off. I didn't want to pollute her memory with the bitter truth I'd learned today. Instead, I drove to Murphy's Tavern, a bar that had been serving working men since before I was born. The same scarred wooden bar, the same smell of cigarettes and industrial disinfectant, the same bartender who'd been there since the Carter administration. "Hal," Tommy Murphy said, not looking up from the glass he was wiping. "You're early today." I'd been coming here every Friday after work for 20 years, always ordering the same thing, a beer and a shot of bourbon, Elena's one concession to my vices, as she called them. But this was Tuesday, and I felt like the rules had changed. "Bourbon," I said. "Make it a double." Tommy raised an eyebrow, but poured without comment. The whiskey burned, going down a clean fire that felt honest after a day of corporate lies. I ordered another, then another, letting the alcohol blur the edges of Vincent Carradine's smug face. "Rough day?" Tommy asked during a lull between customers. "Got fired." The words came out flat, emotionless. After 43 years, Tommy set down his towel and really looked at me for the first time. "Jesus, Hal, I'm sorry." "They didn't even give me a chair." I laughed, but it came out wrong, bitter. 12 chairs in that room, and they made me stand like a fucking servant. I drank until the bar filled up with the after-work crowd, men in hard hats and steel-toed boots who still had jobs to complain about. Their conversations washed over me like background noise. Overtime schedules, foremen who were assholes, wives who didn't understand why they came home exhausted and covered in dirt. It was almost 8 when I finally drove home, probably over the legal limit but past caring. The house was dark, empty, filled with the ghost of routines that had died with Elena. Dinner at 6, news at 7, her reading in bed while I watched late-night talk shows on the couch. I sat at the kitchen table with the severance papers spread in front of me, reading through the non-disclosure agreement with the kind of attention I'd never paid to legal documents before. Standard corporate protection. I couldn't talk to journalists, couldn't disparage the company publicly, couldn't discuss the circumstances of my termination with anyone except immediate family. The penalty for violation was everything they'd offered me and more. My laptop was old, a refurbished Dell that Elena had bought me 3 Christmases ago when she decided I needed to join the modern world. I'd used it mostly for checking weather and reading news, but tonight I found myself typing Carradine Industries into Google and falling down a rabbit hole of annual reports, SEC filings, and local news articles. Vincent Carradine Jr. had taken over the company when his father died 5 years ago. Since then, he'd moved operations out of 3 facilities, laid off over 400 workers, and somehow increased profits by 30%. The business journals called him a turnaround specialist and a visionary leader. The laid-off workers probably had other names for him. I found an article from 2 years ago about Carradine Industries purchasing the historic Riverside building downtown for their new headquarters. $12.8 million, the article said. A significant investment in the community's future. 12.8 million. I sat back in my chair, mind working through numbers that didn't add up. If they had that kind of cash for marble lobbies and mahogany conference tables, how was the pension fund suddenly broke? How were 400 jobs redundant, while executive bonuses hit record highs? My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. Marcus again. "Dad, you never answered my text. How did the meeting go?" I closed my eyes. Marcus was a good kid, 35 now, married with 2 children, working as an engineer for a firm that actually seemed to value their employees. He'd inherited Elena's optimism and faith in the system, her belief that things generally worked out if you played by the rules. "They let me go," I said. Silence on the other end, then, "Shit, Dad. I'm sorry. What about your pension?" "Gone." More silence. "That's not legal, is it? Don't you have a union?" I laughed again, that same bitter sound that had been coming out of me all day. Union died 10 years ago, and apparently it's all perfectly legal if you hide it in the right paperwork. "Dad, listen. Sarah and I have been talking, and we want you to move closer to us. There's a nice senior community about 20 minutes away. And with my salary. I'm not ready for a senior community, Marcus. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. I'm 62, not 92. I know, I just thought, with Mom gone and now this. He meant well. They all meant well. But the idea of spending my remaining years in some sanitized facility, playing shuffleboard and waiting to die, made my skin crawl. Eleanor and I had talked about growing old in this house, about watching our grandchildren play in the same backyard where Marcus had learned to ride a bike. I'll figure something out, I told him. After I hung up, I went back to the computer and started digging deeper. Public records, property assessments, business licenses. The internet was full of information if you knew where to look and had enough bourbon in your system to stay focused. Carradine Industries wasn't just a local company anymore. They had holdings in 6 states, contracts with the federal government, subsidiary companies with names that meant nothing until you traced them back to the source. Vincent Carradine wasn't just some businessman's son. He was running a small empire, built on the backs of men like me. I found his personal address on a real estate website, a mansion in the hills overlooking the city, purchased last year for $4.7 million. The photos showed marble columns, a circular driveway, and a swimming pool bigger than my house. The same week he'd bought that mansion, Carradine Industries had announced the first round of layoffs. I printed out everything, articles, financial reports, property records, until my old printer ran out of ink and started leaving streaks across the pages. The kitchen table disappeared under a paper landscape of corporate malfeasance and personal excess. It was past midnight when I finally found what I was looking for, buried in a city planning document from 18 months ago. Carradine Industries had applied for a zoning variance to expand their headquarters, proposing to purchase the entire block, including the historic Riverside building. But according to the document, they didn't just want to buy it. They wanted to tear it down. The Riverside building had been built in 1924, back when craftsmanship meant something and buildings were constructed to last centuries. It was one of the last examples of authentic Art Deco architecture in the city, with hand-carved limestone facades and stained glass windows that caught the morning light like jewels. Vincent wanted to replace it with a glass and steel tower, another soulless monument to modern greed. I sat back in my chair, mind racing. Building wasn't just Carradine's headquarters. It was a historical landmark, protected by city ordinances and preservation societies. Tearing it down would require environmental studies, community hearings, approval from half a dozen city boards. It would take time, it would take money, and most importantly, it would require public support from the community leaders who actually lived in this city and gave a damn about its history. For the first time since I'd walked out of that conference room, I smiled. Vincent Carradine had made one crucial mistake when he'd denied me a chair at his table. He'd forgotten that some of us still knew how to fight standing up. Wednesday morning came with the kind of grey drizzle that made everything look older and more tired than it was. I'd slept maybe 3 hours, but my mind was sharp in the way it gets when you finally have a purpose after months of drifting. Coffee tasted better, the shower felt hotter, and for the first time since Elena's funeral I had somewhere important to be. The city planning office was housed in a building that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd given up on life halfway through the project. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and the smell of old coffee and bureaucratic despair. I found the right department after 20 minutes of wandering hallways that all looked identical. I need to see the public records for the Riverside building, I told the clerk, a tired-looking woman with reading, glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She looked up from her computer with the expression of someone who'd been answering stupid questions for decades. Property records are on the 3rd floor. Planning documents are here. Which do you need? Planning documents, specifically any applications for demolition or major renovations. She typed something into her computer, frowning at the screen. There's a pending application from, she squinted, Carradine Industries, filed 18 months ago, still under review. Can I see it? It's public record, 25 cents per page for copies. The file was thick, hundreds of pages of architectural drawings, environmental impact studies, and legal documents written in the kind of language designed to make normal people give up and go home. But I wasn't normal people anymore. I was a man with nothing left to lose and time to burn. I spread the documents across one of the metal tables in the research room and started reading. The demolition application was comprehensive, professional, and completely dependent on one crucial factor: community support. According to the city ordinances, tearing down a historic building required approval from the Historic Preservation Board, the Environmental Review Committee, and a public hearing where community members could voice their concerns. The application had been sitting in review because several preservation groups had filed objections. But here was the interesting part. If the building was sold to a new owner who committed to historic preservation, the demolition application became void. I photographed every relevant page with my phone, then walked to the property records office on the 3rd floor. The Riverside building was currently owned by the Morrison Trust, an estate that had been trying to sell for 3 years. The asking price had dropped from $15 million to $12.8 million, exactly what Carradine had offered. But the sale hadn't closed yet. "Is there a way to find out why the sale is stalled?" I asked the property clerk, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "You'd have to ask the real estate agent. Morrison Trust has been working with—" He checked his screen. "Blackwood and Associates downtown." I drove across town to Blackwood and Associates, a small firm squeezed between a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop. The office was cramped but clean, with the desperate optimism of a business that was always 3 clients away from bankruptcy. Theodore Blackwood was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of earnest face that suggested he still believed in honest dealing and fair commissions. He looked surprised when I walked in without an appointment. "I'm interested in the Riverside building," I said. His eyebrows shot up. "Are you representing a company? Because I should mention we have a pending offer from—" "Carradine Industries, I know." I sat down in the chair across from his desk, without being invited. "What's the hold-up?" Ted, he'd introduced himself as Ted, shifted uncomfortably. "Well, there are some complications with the trust requirements. The Morrison family specified that any sale had to preserve the building's historic character. Carradine's plans for demolition violate those conditions, so the sale can't go through. Not unless they modify their plans, or we find another buyer who meets the preservation requirements." He leaned forward, suddenly interested. "Are you looking to purchase? Because I have to tell you, it's a beautiful building, but it needs significant restoration work. The electrical system alone would cost—" "How much work?" I interrupted. Ted pulled out a thick folder and spread inspection reports across his desk. "The structure is sound. They built things to last in the 20s, but you're looking at about $2 million in renovations to bring it up to modern building codes. New electrical, updated plumbing, ADA compliance, seismic, retrofitting. $2 million plus $12.8 million. Almost $15 million total. I had $437 in my checking account." "What about financing?" I asked. "For a project this size, you'd need substantial assets or collateral. Most banks want to see personal net worth of at least $20 million before they'll consider a loan this large." Ted's voice was gentle, the tone of someone used to crushing dreams professionally. "May I ask what your background is in?" "Commercial real estate." "I don't have one," I said. "I just got fired yesterday after 43 years with Carradine Industries." Ted's face went through several expressions. Confusion, sympathy, then something that might have been recognition. "You're the Harold Brewster who worked for them. I heard about the layoffs. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Help me." I leaned across his desk, close enough to see the surprise in his eyes. "You said the building needs an owner who'll preserve it. I'll preserve every brick, every window, every piece of original molding. But I need to know, is there any way to finance this without $20 million in assets?" Ted was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "There are some unconventional options," he said finally. "Historic preservation grants, tax incentives, community development loans. It would be complicated, and the approval process could take months." "How many months?" 6 to 18, depending on how many hoops we have to jump through." I felt something click into place in my chest, like a gear finding its groove. "And during that time, what happens to Carradine's offer? If we can demonstrate good faith progress toward an alternative sale, the trust might be willing to extend the deadline, especially if the alternative preserves the building." I stood up, energy buzzing through me like electricity. "I want to make an offer. Mr. Brewster, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but without some demonstration of financial capability." I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken that morning, the deed to my house, which Elena and I had paid off 2 years before she got sick. "The house is worth about $400,000. It's all I have, but it's something." Ted stared at the photo, then at me. "You want to risk your home on a $15 million renovation project?" "I want to risk my home on preventing Vincent Carradine from tearing down a piece of this city's history." I sat back down, keeping my voice steady. "That man took away my pension, my job, my dignity. He made me stand in his conference room like hired help after 4 decades of service. But he made one mistake." "What's that?" He assumed I'd go quietly. Ted was quiet for another long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, less professional, more human. "My grandfather worked construction in this city for 50 years. Same kind of story as yours. Company promised him the world, then threw him away when it was convenient." He looked at the inspection reports scattered across his desk. "I'll tell you what. Let me make some calls, see what kind of grant programs might apply. If there's a path forward, even a narrow one, I'll help you find it. And in the meantime, I'll file your offer with the Morrison Trust. Even if it's not financially viable yet, it shows intent. That might be enough to stall Carradine's purchase." I shook his hand, surprised by the firmness of his grip. "Thank you." As I walked back to my truck, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, hope mixed with fear in equal measure. Elena used to say that the best decisions were the ones that scared you just enough to make your hands shake, but not enough to make you run. My hands were definitely shaking. I drove home and called Marcus, getting his voicemail. "Hey, son, I wanted you to know I'm going to be okay. More than okay, actually. I've got a project I'm working on, something your mother would have approved of. I'll call you later." Then I sat down at my computer and started researching historic preservation grants, community development programs, and unconventional financing options for commercial real estate. The kitchen table disappeared again under printouts and legal documents, but this time they felt different. This time, they felt like weapons. By evening, I had a preliminary plan sketched out on notebook paper, a web of grants, loans, tax incentives, and community partnerships that might, with enough luck and persistence, actually work. It was complicated, risky, and dependent on about 50 different things going right, but it was possible. As the sun set through my kitchen window, painting the walls the same golden color Eleanor had loved, I allowed myself to imagine Vincent Carradine's face when he found out that Harold Brewster, the man he'd made stand like a servant in his own conference room, had just stolen his $12.8 million prize out from under him. The thought made me smile as I reached for the phone to call Ted Blackwood. It was time to make some formal offers. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. "Harold?" Ted's voice was tight with excitement and something that might have been disbelief. "We need to talk. Are you free this morning?" I was free every morning now, but I didn't say that. "What's going on?" "I found something. Several somethings. Can you meet me at the Riverside building in an hour?" The building stood on the corner of 5th and Morrison, like a fortress from another era, its limestone facade darkened with age, but still magnificent. Art Deco eagles perched above the entrance, their wings spread in permanent flight. I'd driven past it 1,000 times without really seeing it, but now I noticed details that made my chest tight. The intricate metalwork around the windows, the way the morning light caught the carved reliefs, the solid weight of craftsmanship that had been built to outlast the men who created it. Ted was waiting by the entrance with a ring of old-fashioned keys and a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "The Morrison Trust gave me permission to show you the interior," he said, unlocking the heavy glass doors. "What I found last night is going to change everything about this deal." The lobby took my breath away. 20-foot ceilings, marble floors in geometric patterns that looked like frozen jazz, music, and a bronze elevator door decorated with sunburst designs that caught the light like gold leaf. Everything was dusty, some of the fixtures needed repair, but the bones were perfect. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ted said, watching my face. "But that's not why I called you. We rode the elevator to the third floor, where Ted led me to a corner office with windows facing both directions. The view stretched across downtown to the river, where barges moved like toys in the distance. This was Morrison's personal office, Ted said, setting his folder on a dusty desk. When the trust hired me to sell the building, they gave me access to his private files. Last night I went through everything, looking for any documentation that might help with grant applications. He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of yellowed papers. Harold, did you know that your grandfather worked on this building? The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Thomas Brewster, master stonemason. He's listed in the original construction records from 1924. Ted handed me a document that looked like it had been typed on an ancient typewriter. He did all the exterior stonework, the eagles, the window surrounds, everything. I stared at the paper, my grandfather's name typed in faded black ink. Thomas Brewster, master stonemason. I'd heard stories about him from my father, how he'd come from Ireland with nothing but strong hands and a willingness to work, how he'd helped build half the historic buildings in the city before the Depression killed the construction boom. There's more, Ted said, pulling out another document. Morrison kept detailed records of everyone who worked on the building. Your grandfather isn't just listed as a contractor. He's mentioned specifically in Morrison's personal correspondence. Ted handed me a letter written in careful cursive on letterhead that had turned brown with age. The work completed by Thomas Brewster exceeds all expectations. His attention to and commitment to craftsmanship represents the finest traditions of the building arts. I have never seen stonework of such quality and precision. This building will stand as a monument to his skill for generations to come. My hands were shaking. I set the letter down before I dropped it. Harold, this changes everything about your financing options, Ted said. There are specific grant programs for descendants of original craftsmen working on historic preservation. The National Trust has a Legacy Craftsman initiative that could cover up to 40% of renovation costs. 40% of $2 million was $800,000. Still a massive sum, but suddenly the impossible felt merely improbable. How do we apply? We'll need documentation proving your lineage, testimony from preservation experts, architectural plans that demonstrate authentic restoration techniques. Ted was pulling more papers from his folder. I made some calls last night. There's a preservation architect in Chicago who specializes in 1920s commercial buildings. She's worked on grant applications before. How much does an architect cost? For a project this size? Probably $200,000 just for the plans. Ted saw my face and held up his hand. But here's the thing. Dr. Catherine Walsh, the architect I'm talking about, she wrote her doctoral thesis on Art Deco preservation. When I told her about the Brewster connection, she got excited. Really excited. He pulled out his phone and showed me an email. She wants to partner with us. Pro bono work in exchange for publication rights and academic credit. Harold, this is exactly the kind of story that gets preservation people fired up. Working-class craftsman's grandson saving his grandfather's masterpiece from corporate demolition. I walked to the window and looked down at the street where my grandfather had probably stood 99 years ago, measuring cuts and planning angles and laying stone that would outlast his own children. The irony wasn't lost on me. Thomas Brewster's hands had built this place, and now Thomas Brewster's grandson was trying to save it from the great-grandson of the man who'd probably fired him when the Depression hit. What's the timeline? I asked. If we move fast, we could have grant applications submitted within 6 weeks. The Legacy Craftsman Initiative meets quarterly. Next review is in 3 months. If approved, funding could be available within 6 months. 6 months. In 6 months, I could own the building my grandfather had helped create with his own hands, the building where Vincent Carradine currently held meetings in conference rooms with not enough chairs for working men. There's one more thing, Ted said, and his voice had changed again. I called the Morrison Trust this morning to update them on our progress. The trustee mentioned something interesting. Apparently, Carradine Industries has been pressuring them to speed up the sale. They've made 3 increasingly aggressive offers in the past 2 weeks. Aggressive how? Above asking price. Significantly above. The latest offer was $14.2 million, nearly $2 million over the listed price. Ted closed his folder and looked at me directly. Harold, they're desperate to close this deal. The question is why? I thought about the demolition application, the zoning variances, the environmental studies. How long has Carradine been planning this purchase? According to the paperwork, they first expressed interest 2 years ago, but the serious negotiations only started 6 months, right around the time Eleanor had died, when I'd been too grief-stricken to pay attention to office rumors about restructuring and layoffs, right around the time Vincent Carradine had started laying the groundwork for his corporate revolution. Ted, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. What are the real odds that this plan works? He was quiet for a long moment, studying the dust motes floating in the afternoon sunlight. Honestly, maybe 30%. There are a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things that have to go right. The grant money isn't guaranteed. The financing will be complicated. And even if everything goes perfectly, you're still talking about risking your house and probably going into debt for the rest of your life. And if I don't try? Vincent Carradine buys this building, tears it down, and builds another glass box that could be anywhere in America. Your grandfather's work disappears, and you go home to your empty house and spend the next 20 years wondering what might have happened if you'd been brave enough to try. I looked around the office one more time, at the carved ceiling moldings, the original hardwood floors, the windows that framed the city like paintings. Somewhere in these walls was stone that my grandfather had cut and placed with his own hands, work that had lasted nearly a century and could last another century if someone cared enough to preserve it. Eleanor would have called it crazy. She would have worried about the money, the risk, the possibility of losing everything we'd worked for. But she also would have understood why I had to try. Let's do it, I said. Ted grinned, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. I'll call Dr. Walsh tonight. We'll set up a conference call for tomorrow morning. As we rode the elevator down, I felt something shifting inside me, the same feeling I'd had 44 years ago when I'd asked Elena to marry me, when I'd known the answer would change everything, but asked anyway because some risks are worth taking. We were walking through the lobby when Ted's phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, then his face went pale. That was the Morrison Trust, he said after hanging up. Carradine Industries just submitted a new offer, $15 million cash, with a request to close within 2 weeks. 15 million, 3 million, above asking price. Vincent Carradine wasn't just desperate now, he was panicking. And men who panic make mistakes. Ted, I said, how quickly can we get those grant applications submitted? If we work around the clock, maybe 3 weeks. Do it, whatever it takes. I looked back at the bronze elevator doors, at the eagles carved in stone above the entrance, at the building my grandfather had helped create and that I was now determined to save. Vincent Carradine thinks he can buy his way. Out of this, I smiled, feeling something cold and sharp settling in my chest. He's about to learn that some things aren't for sale. 3 months later, I stood in the same conference room where Vincent Carradine had made me stand like a servant, but this time the dynamics had changed in ways that made my chest tight, with something between satisfaction and disbelief. Dr. Catherine Walsh sat at the mahogany table with architectural plans spread in front of her like battle maps. Ted Blackwood was on my right, a stack of approved grant applications 6 inches thick beside his coffee cup. Across from us, Vincent Carradine looked like a man who'd been chewing glass for breakfast. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Vincent said, his voice carrying the controlled fury of someone who'd been outmaneuvered by people he'd considered beneath his notice. You're claiming that Harold Brewster has legitimate financing for a $15 million purchase. Dr. Walsh smiled with the confidence of someone who'd spent her career making the impossible happen. Not claiming, Mr. Carradine, documenting. She slid a folder across the table. The Legacy Craftsman Initiative approved the full grant request, $2.4 million for authentic restoration. The State Historic Preservation Office added another $800,000. And the Federal Community Development Bank approved a historic preservation loan for the balance, secured by Mr. Brewster's property and guaranteed by the anticipated tax credit revenue. I watched Vincent's face as he read through the documentation. His carefully maintained composure was developing cracks, small fissures that suggested the pressure underneath was building towards something explosive. "This is ridiculous," he said finally. "Harold, you're 62 years old with no experience in commercial real estate. You're going to bankrupt yourself on some sentimental fantasy about your grandfather." "Maybe," I said, "but it'll be my bankruptcy, not yours." The Morrison Trust's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Cross, cleared her throat. "Mr. Carradine, I appreciate your concern for Mr. Brewster's financial well-being, but the Trust's obligation is to honor the terms of the estate. Mr. Morrison's will specifically requires preservation of the building's historic character. Your demolition plans violate those terms." "We've modified our plans," Vincent said quickly. "We're prepared to preserve the facade." "The facade?" Dr. Walsh's voice carried the indignation of someone who'd devoted her life to architectural integrity. "Mr. Carradine, that's like preserving someone's skin while removing their skeleton. The interior spaces are as historically significant as the exterior." Vincent turned to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked desperate. "Harold, be reasonable. What do you really know about running a commercial building? The maintenance costs alone will eat you alive. I'm offering $15 million. You could take that money, invest it properly, live comfortably for the rest of your life." "Comfortably," I repeated, "like the comfortable retirement you promised me along with my pension." The room went quiet. Vincent's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. "Here's what I know about running a building," I continued. "I know that when the heat breaks down, you call someone who actually knows how to fix it instead of hiring consultants to study the problem. I know that when the roof leaks, you patch it with materials that'll last, not whatever's cheapest in the quarterly budget. And I know that when someone works for you for 43 years, you don't make them stand in your conference room because you forgot to order enough chairs." Jennifer Cross was trying not to smile. "If there are no further objections, the Trust is prepared to accept Mr. Brewster's offer. The sale will be finalized through public auction next week, as required by the estate." "Terms?" Vincent stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "This isn't over, Harold. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." After he left, the room felt lighter, like a storm had passed. Dr. Walsh started rolling up her architectural plans, humming something that sounded like victory. "Harold," Ted said, "I have to ask, are you sure about this? It's not too late to change your mind." I looked around the conference room one more time. The same mahogany table, the same view of the city, the same marble floors. But now I saw it differently, not as a place where powerful men made decisions about other people's lives, but as a space that would soon belong to someone who understood the difference between cost and value. I'm sure. The auction was held the following Thursday in the building's lobby, beneath the bronze eagles my grandfather had carved. I arrived early, wearing the same suit I'd worn to Eleanor's funeral, the only suit I owned that still fit properly. The crowd was smaller than I'd expected. A few real estate speculators, some Preservation Society members, and Vincent Carradine with two lawyers who looked like they charged by the minute. Marcus had driven down from the capital, still convinced his father had lost his mind but determined to be supportive. "Dad," he said, gripping my shoulder, "whatever happens today, I'm proud of you." The auctioneer was a brisk woman who looked like she'd sold everything from antiques to livestock. She explained the terms. Sealed bids, highest offer wins, sale final upon gavel. "We have 3 qualified bidders," she announced. "The auction will proceed in standard fashion." Vincent's first bid was $16 million, $1 million above his previous offer and $4 million above asking price. The Preservation Society bid $8 million, which was all they could raise. I bid $12.8 million, exactly what Carradine had originally offered. $16.5 million, Vincent called out, his voice tight. The auctioneer looked at me. My mouth felt dry as sand, but I managed to speak clearly. $17 million. A murmur went through the crowd. Vincent's lawyers were whispering urgently in his ears, but he shook them off. $18 million, he said. I felt the weight of everything Elena and I had built together, everything we'd saved and sacrificed for, balanced against the chance to honor my grandfather's work and deny Vincent Carradine his corporate monument. 12.8 million, I said. The auctioneer frowned. Sir, the current bid is 18 million. You need to bid higher, not lower. I'm not bidding higher, I said. I'm pointing out that 12.8 million was Mr. Carradine's original offer. The same amount he paid for his mansion while he was laying off 400 workers. The same amount he could have paid 6 months ago if he hadn't been so sure he could bully the Morrison Trust into accepting his demolition plans. Vincent's face was turning an interesting shade of purple. "That's not how auctions work, Harold." "You're right," I said. "Auctions are about the highest bid. So here's mine, 12.8 million, plus something you can't buy." I pulled out a folder and handed copies to the auctioneer and Jennifer Cross. A binding commitment to restore this building to its original grandeur, using authentic materials and traditional techniques, a promise to rent office space to local businesses at below market rates, and a guarantee that the building will remain in community ownership in perpetuity through a historic preservation trust. The auctioneer looked confused. "Mr. Brewster, I appreciate your intentions, but the trust's obligation is to accept the highest monetary bid." "Actually," Jennifer Cross said, studying the documents I'd provided, "that's not quite accurate. The trust's obligation is to honor Mr. Morrison's wishes as expressed in his will, and his will specifically states that preference should be given to buyers who demonstrate commitment to the building's historic and community value." She looked up at Vincent. "Mr. Carradine, are you prepared to make similar commitments regarding historic preservation and community benefit?" Vincent's lawyers were shaking their heads frantically, but he was beyond listening to legal advice. "This is bullshit. I'm offering $18 million cash for a building you plan to tear down," I said, "to build another generic office tower that could be anywhere in America, while I'm offering to preserve a piece of this city's history that your own grandfather probably helped build." The auctioneer looked between us, then at Jennifer Cross, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer said, "considering the estate requirements and the community benefit provisions, I'm accepting the bid of Harold Brewster for $12.8 million. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot. Vincent Carradine's face went white as paper, his trembling hands clutching the edge of a folding table someone had set up for the paperwork. The same expression he'd worn 43 years ago when he'd made me stand like a servant while everyone else sat. The same expression he'd worn when he'd told me my pension was gone. My 43 years of loyalty worth nothing more than a severance check and a non-disclosure agreement. Now I owned it all. The building, the marble, floors, the bronze elevators, every brick and window and carved stone eagle. Everything he'd wanted to destroy, I would preserve. Everything he'd tried to take from the community, I would give back. Marcus hugged me so hard, I thought my ribs might crack. Dr. Walsh was already on her phone, probably calling contractors and craftsmen and preservation specialists. Ted was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. But I was looking at Vincent Carradine, watching him realize that Harold Brewster, the man he'd fired, the man he'd humiliated, the man he'd forgotten was still capable of fighting back, had just outplayed him using the one thing money couldn't buy: principle. As the crowd dispersed and the paperwork was signed, I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the 15th floor. When the doors opened, I stepped into the conference room where this had all started, where Vincent had made me stand because there weren't enough chairs for working men. I looked around the room one more time, then picked up the phone and called the office furniture store. "I need to order some chairs," I said. "Enough for everyone."